course, meet the minister today with, Amy is over there, our very own minister, Amy G.S.A. Brooks. Very exciting chance to get to know her. I want to remind folks that we will have about until 10 o'clock for presentation, and then we're going to move into Q&A, and by 10:15 you're going to maybe be hearing a lot of beautiful music and so on coming from the sanctuary, and then it's time to put chairs away, and we will love your help in getting those chairs put away. I am also just excited to have this chance today to ask Amy some questions. I keep leaning over so I can see who all's here. I wanted to call people's attention to this little thing at the bottom of our newsletter. If you get the paper newsletter, there have been these fun facts about Amy, who enjoys all types of animals but has a special fondness for cats. Same here. So there are multiple ways to get to know her. We do ask today, and I'll try to remind you at the time of questions and answers too, that we'd like for you to keep your focus on Amy as a human being, as a leader, her journey to UUCD, rather than the vast subject of Australia, because we could spend all our time on that. She does love talking about her home country, but we'll just, we only have 45 minutes today. So with that, I'd love to ask Minister Amy to step on up. And I am so looking forward to hearing what you have to share with us. I was also very interested to learn that you're a poet and that you have a book of poetry that has already been published and one coming out. So maybe you'll say something about that today. But I'm out of hand, so I'm gonna clap my leg here, and yeah, here she comes. Thank you.
You will observe that is a literal stepping up because they pulled out the little kids platform for me. Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to angle this screen slightly as it is. I'm going to drop this computer.
You got it?
I'm not dropping the computer. No one saw that happen. I'm going to angle the screen slightly as it was cutting off the top of my head. And that's some of the head that I enjoy having. I'm going to take a deep breath and start again. Good morning, I am Amy G.S.A. Brooks. I'm the minister here, as was made obvious during the introduction. I'm wearing an orange t-shirt and a blue denim dress, and I am wearing a KF94 face mask to accommodate my physical needs and as a spiritual practice. I will go into some frequently asked questions to begin with, and I'm often asked about the face mask and the spiritual practice piece. I don't have time today to get into the philosophy of seeing the face mask as a spiritual practice, but I do want to make clear that the primary reason for me to wear a mask is my accommodations of my physical needs. And for me, claiming that as a spiritual practice is a way for me to not resent the accommodations that I need, but instead to find joy in them. I'm also often asked what my middle initials are all about, and they stand for Giant Salt Anarchy, Good Soup Always. No, I'm lying. It's very, very boring. It's just my middle initials. My parents, when they got married, decided they were going to have 2 children, and they were going to have 2 daughters, and they were going to call one Amy Grace and the other one Sarah Ann. And then my 2 brothers came along, and they didn't name either of them any of those names. So when I came along, I got all of them because they were done. And I recently have started reclaiming my middle initials. There was a period of time in my childhood and teen years where this will be something you've never experienced. but I had a little bit of embarrassment about, being in any way different to anyone else. But these are my names, and actually I do love them. And it's not an Australian practice to give your kids many, many middle names, if you're wondering about that. But yeah, so today what I want to talk about is a little bit about journeys. There's the physical journey of how I came to be here in Duluth. I tell people that I've gradually been making my way further north my entire life, because I am from Adelaide, which is the capital of the state of South Australia. It's a massive, enormous city of 1 million people, which is not that big in the American context, but it is by far the largest city in my home state. And I moved around in Australia quite a lot as well. When I came to the United States in 2005, people also commonly ask me, how did I come to live in America? Or how did I come to be in the Midwest in America? Like as if you don't know the Midwest is the best part of America. And the flippant answer I typically give is that, when you're driving and you take the wrong exit ramp and you end up in a completely different place than you thought you would be, yeah, that sums up my entire life. And the very, very boring answer is that my ex has just always wanted to live in America and applied for visas, and we came. So you see how my answer is the superior one, right? I lived for some years in Tennessee, which was a very different experience to anything I'd ever had in life before. And then we moved to another country, which was Southern Illinois. I lived for many years in Southern Illinois, mainly in the area of St. Louis, Missouri, like right by the river, close enough to the river that it mattered every time that river flooded. And then moved to Michigan for some years. Very much loved Michigan and the friends that I've made there. And then we moved here in August. So like I said, in Michigan we were in Grand Rapids, so not the UP. And so just a little further north each year. And that's worked out really well for me as someone who does not love summer. I'm sorry to all of you who enjoy the sunshine and being roasted alive and the sensation of not being able to breathe in a full breath of air, which are all my associations with summer. My mother was British, so she gave me her skin. Thanks, Mum. Which means that I have 2 states of being pasty pale or lobster red and peeling. Yeah. I'm not equipped to live in sunny areas. And my favorite season is winter. And I had not experienced snow until I moved to the United States. And it is, someone asked me last night at the Diwali meal what it is I like about snow. And I was trying to say, well, it's magical frozen water that falls from the sky for free. What's not to love about that? Where I come from, we barely get the regular water that falls from the sky for free. So those are some of the things that I am often asked about. I'm less often asked about my spiritual journey, which I will share a little bit, keeping an eye on the time because I have a habit sometimes of forgetting that exists and then over-talking. I will share a little bit about my spiritual journey. and that is, again, going back to my childhood. I was raised in a Christian conservative home. I was well loved and cared for, and I was given a small box of truth and meaning, a small, well-defined casket, if you will. And so part of my spiritual journey has been breaking out and a broadening and a widening of what I value and what I hold close. I would almost say that the church I went to as a child was a home church, because we went to various church buildings, but my dad was really the theologian that I interacted with the most. And then in my teen years, I rebelled, as teenagers do. And I did the rebellious thing of going to an Anglican church. Ooh. Which in the United States, I understand, is Episcopal. Right. Yeah. I went to an Anglican church, but the evening services, not the morning ones. You see how cutting edge I am. And this required me to take a bus into the city, which was something I'd never done before. I hadn't gone out of my way to take a bus downtown, and it felt empowering and freeing in ways that, as I say, I rebelled by going to an Anglican church, doesn't really convey. And then just as I interacted with different congregations, I got a sense of how much bigger the world of belief is than the one I was raised in. And I could probably do 45 minutes just on my spiritual journey, but the shortcut is that I entered seminary. I went to Eden Theological Seminary in St. Louis, Missouri. I entered seminary a United Methodist, and I left a Unitarian Universalist. So seminary did its job. And then the other journey I can talk about is the journey of understanding myself as a person. Because again, I started with a small treasured chest of meaning. And when I say it's a small box, I don't want to diminish its value or the work that my parents poured into it. It was precious and it was carefully done. But I started with a small treasure chest of understanding who I was allowed to be as a person. If you're familiar with that feeling at all, part of that was the instruction that women should have long hair and are not allowed to be ministers. So you can see how well that lesson stuck. I also married as a teenager, which is not something I necessarily recommend. Many people have good and healthy marriages that began as teens. Mine was not. In many ways, it was a toxic relationship that I stayed in for 20 years. And part of understanding myself as a person and the delay in that it took me to discover myself was from being in that relationship. So when I left that marriage, I more fully claimed myself. For the first time, at 38 years old, I understood myself to be a queer woman, which I don't think is all that unique an experience, sadly, in the world that we live in, that we have been told over and over again who we are allowed to be, to the point where we can't imagine being any different. And it is a beautiful and terrifying and important journey to meet ourselves for the first time in our later decades of life. And I'm very grateful for the many people who loved me through those waters. And part of discovering myself as a queer woman was understanding that I couldn't continue to work for the United Methodist Church unless they did their work on understanding who they were as people, which it is my understanding they have been trying to do that work since the formation of the United Methodist Church. But in recent years, progress is being seen that hasn't been seen in the past. I left the United Methodists primarily for that reason, but I'm not waiting for them to change so that I can go back, as some ministers who have left that tradition are. The other reasons I left was, one of my years at seminary, I took United Methodist History and Polity, United Church of Christ History and Polity, and Unitarian Universalist History and Polity, because I enjoy suffering and boredom. And what it taught me was that I am not a United Methodist, that I disagree fundamentally with many of their closely held values. And it was a toss-up whether to consider myself United Church of Christ or Unitarian Universalist. And in the end, I realized that in our tradition, we don't ask people to choose parts of themselves. So I now consider myself to be a Unitarian Universalist United Church of Christ Christian. And if you can imagine trying to fit all of that on a business card. So Christianity is where my roots are. And the time I spent in Christian spaces has gifted me with clarity to see the strengths and also the weaknesses. And there are weaknesses, as we know. It also means that in my writing, I feel no sense of cultural appropriation when I critique Christianity, because it is critique that is coming from, the call is coming from inside the house, as they say. My values, my belief system are in Unitarian Universalism. So there's a sense of Christianity being who I was, and UU being who I am, and who I am coming to be. Does everyone understand a sense of the distinction there? So I was asked also about my writing, and that is where you see, I believe, that combination of who I am and where my values are most strongly. Because I write what I affectionately refer to as heretical Bible-based poetry. So as you can imagine, I am just raking in the money hand over fist on that one. My first book and the book that's coming out next year are readings for congregations and for individuals who value the lectionary calendar, which is a series of readings over 3 years. And if you read them every day, at the end of 3 years, in theory, you will have read most of the Bible. In practice, you will not have read most of the Bible, as it leaves out some very important and honestly disturbing texts. And I believe that was intentional when they structured it that way. Because Christians and people in countries like ours don't want to be reminded of texts that talk about slaves obeying masters and that talk about women being submissive to men. So some of those texts are not included in that read this every day and you'll know the whole Bible story. But I write based on that, and I write intentionally thinking of where the marginalized people are. So I ask congregations when they consider what is to them a familiar text to think about how this would be received by someone who is a person of color, by a queer person, by a refugee or an immigrant, by a disabled person, by someone who is in a different class system. And if we are to pretend that we don't have class systems in this nation and in mine, then we are lying to ourselves. So if you have interest in that, then you can read these books. I do like to give people a caution that there is theological content and that there are references to God and Jesus, and I know that that is not something that everyone is comfortable or would even be healthy for everyone to be engaged with. And my work there is, it is my strongly held belief that Christianity has a lot of work to do in the area of the harms that Christians have done and continue to do as recently as to this very day, as we witnessed last week, as we see white Christian nationalism specifically impacting all of us and the most threatened of us in particular. So this was light and fun, and why I don't talk about my book much. And the other journey, another journey that I have made in life is my understanding of myself as a disabled person. Like many of us, I went into life making assumptions about how the lived experience will be. And some of those assumptions were that disabilities were things that happened to other people, and that I was just fine. I took great, quiet, smug pride anytime I went to the doctor and they asked what medications I took daily. For many years, when I could say I take no medications daily, and they were astonished, into my 40s. Which I say that not to boast, but as a confession. Because in reality, as I actually stayed in communities long enough to develop a working relationship with a doctor who knew me for long enough to understand what was really going on with my physical body and with my brain, I really should have been taking medications for many years longer. And I now do take daily medications for the well-being of my brain and for my mental health. And I no longer see it as a source of pride or otherwise, because we all require accommodations to get through life. Some of us require medication. Some of us require glasses. Some of us require a wheelchair. All of us require a community of care. And my increase in awareness and understanding of disability justice has been one of the most challenging and enriching of my many journeys in life. But here I am with you all now today, and maybe the question you're really wondering is what I'm doing in Duluth, Minnesota, specifically in this congregation. And I will tell you that my wife, Lori, who couldn't be here today because she also has a church job, and they have strong feelings about church employees being at church time. Weird, right? Is from the Twin Cities and has always wanted to live in Duluth, Minnesota. I had made several trips this way with her early in our relationship and fell in love with the town and with this part of Minnesota. And so when I was looking for ministry positions available, honestly, I began looking in Michigan because, and this might just be me, but I really hate moving house. Show of hands, everyone that really loves moving house. Yeah, it's no one. No one likes it. But when I realized that I would need to extend my search broader than a 2-hour drive from my home, the first listing I saw was this one. And it was like a light went off. It was like a sign, like on the interstate, but lit up like a neon sign. It was like choirs of angels that I don't necessarily believe in started singing. You need to understand, I hadn't opened the profile yet. I just saw that there was a position in Duluth. And so you might say I was predisposed to enjoy or to appreciate what I was about to read. And the profile that your search team put together was so carefully and lovingly done and described so well a congregation that I have very quickly come to also love and care for. That I was, what's the line from the movie? You had me at hello. And then I moved here, and the lake keeps flirting with me. Like, you don't have to flirt with me. I'm already in love with you. I'm looking forward to discovering if my love of snow will survive a Duluth winter. It certainly will help that we are in an apartment building, so we don't have to shovel our own snow, which, like the steps I'm standing on, is a little bit cheating, but that's okay. And I think we'll take some time for questions now.
Anybody have a question? Of course, Will Munger would like to ask the first question. Sally will be limiting you in the content, so go ahead.
You'll learn not to listen to Catherine. I'm just curious to know what aspects of Christianity you feel you need or that you turn to, and while also being a Unitarian. What does Christianity offer that Unitarianism doesn't?
Sure. Was everyone able to hear that? I know you had the microphone, but I'd just like to check. I don't believe Christianity offers anything that Unitarian Universalism doesn't. And I also am very well read in Christian texts. And so, are you familiar with the psychological understanding of the way brains work, that the habits form because neurons are connected in ways that we fall into more frequently? The more often you do something, the more often you will think that. So there's a little bit where there's a habit which I need to be intentional about not always walking that path. So that's part of the challenge for me as well. And what really continues to speak to me, what stops me from setting down Christianity and moving away from it altogether, is my understanding of the person Jesus, as described in the text, and a little bit the little we know of the historical person or people who spoke to people in those early ancient times, as someone who is, one, my belief is of Jesus as a non-binary genderqueer person who I typically refer to using they, them pronouns, based on the stories I have read about how they interacted with various genders of people in historical times that had very strict rules about how gendered people interacted together. Who was a non-binary, genderqueer, brown, radical person who pointed to a better way of loving on a one-on-one basis, but also in a congregational sense, in a corporate sense, who challenged authority as good prophets will, who embodied what it means to be holy in the same way that I believe we embody holiness, so is no more divine or less divine than you or I, and who lived those beliefs so fully that they were lived to the point of death, and who was executed for the crime of being brown, of being other, of being Palestinian, and of being a challenge to authorities, and whose message lives on and has lived on and has inspired minority people for 2,000 years.
Good enough, Will? Was that a good enough answer? Yeah, Will's gonna be working on that at home. And Sally will be explaining to him exactly what it is. Bev.
And this may be a silly question because I might know the answer, but it's come from my view. And I would like to know from your experience, what is it that told you wanted to be a minister?
That's a really good question, and one that we are required to answer every second day as we go through the process of trying to become a minister. So I am ready with an answer, so thank you. Again, remembering that I was raised with this tiny little treasure chest of what it means to be a human and what to value and what matters. And part of that is women cannot be ministers, or women and genders other than men cannot be ministers. So I like to do things backwards. Sometimes I do things and then later I realize why I was doing them. And it was a long unpacking of that theology I was given. But essentially what it boils down to is the realization that it didn't matter what career or life path or activity I did, I was doing it as a minister. And For example, I worked in the Grand Rapids Public Library system for 3 years in Michigan while I was searching for a congregation. And every day I went into that workplace as a ministry employee, which means that when someone comes up to the counter to send a fax to a government department to explain that their loved one has died, or that they're making a report of a harm that had been done to them, that interaction for me is not just, thank you for this paper, fax the paper, here's your confirmation that it has been sent. It means checking in on their well-being. It became little tiny pastoral care moments. It means making sure they're connected with resources they need from the community they may not have thought about. So that's a little snapshot of how I found myself interacting in any of the spaces that I was moving in. And at some point I realized, if I'm going to do the work of ministry, I may as well get paid to do it. I may as well let go of the fear of disappointing my dad and claim the title that I know is mine. And that's what I chose to do.
Thank you.
Amy, I'm Tim, if you know. Both in your native land and here in the Americas, the European settlement / encroachment happened had many problematic aspects, shall we say. This is a place where, unlike many of the other places that I've lived, where there's a very palpable recognition of First Peoples. Land acknowledgements have become common in services, unfortunately. But I'm just wondering if in your encounters with original Aboriginal cultures, any of that has flowed into your worldview or your spiritual practices, or if there are things that you're just interested in.
Yeah. This is another really good question because it gives me the opportunity to invite you all to stay for the service, during which I will be talking about this topic. So thank you. Without giving away too much of the sermon or accidentally preaching the sermon, which no one has time for, that has been another part of my journey. The understanding that myself as Australian means understanding that I am connected to systems of oppression and have benefited from them, particularly as someone who is second generation British as well, because my mum was British and moved to Australia when she was 8 or 9 years old. And I have British citizenship. So I'm not just white Australian, I'm white Australian British. And I am mindful, or I remind myself to be mindful, that when I am working with Indigenous people, that puts me much closer to the colonizer than the colonized. I think that might be all I will say on that right now.
Is there anything online? Any online questions, Meg?
Not yet.
Meredith? No, not yet, okay. Who else do we have? We have 5 minutes left. Okay, we got Tom Morgan here in the front row.
Early in your remarks, you said something about a watershed moment in your life when you moved to Tennessee, or words to that effect. Could you expand on that? What Tennessee did to you, or how it formed you?
Yes, I would love to. I truly believe that everyone, if given the opportunity, would benefit from living in another culture to the one they were born in. And anyone who does not have that opportunity, a work of justice and reparation might be to financially support that in some way. What I learned from living in Tennessee is how much of what we believe is truly cultural and less based in anything like fact. So, as an Australian, it is my belief as a cultural assumption about life, and this is a flippant example, but drinking alcohol is totally fine, and after church you will all gather at the pub for drinks. But if you smoke tobacco, that's just one of the worst crimes you could do to your body. As an Australian who moved to Tennessee, where as you are driving, you can see the barns smoking as the tobacco is cured, and as you talk with people, alcohol is talked of in hushed, whispered terms, I understood that that was a cultural belief. That both alcohol and tobacco have long historic meaning, again, particularly to Indigenous communities when we talk about tobacco, and when abused or used in harmful ways can be quite damaging. Similarly, I have friends in Sweden, and their closely held cultural belief for many years has been that, oh, alcohol's fine, but if you play card games, you're a loose person. Right, like euchre. I lived in Michigan, guys, okay? So I can't take seriously the concept of, playing, a card game with your family is morally damaging. And there are people with gambling addictions for whom it is. So basically, living in another country, and specifically in Tennessee, really taught me to question why I so insisted upon my understanding of my culture's values to be the one that's correct, and that someone else's might be completely wrong.
Is 10:15, Meredith?
It's 10:15, Kathy.
Do you know what's going on the next time?
I do.
All right, it's all yours.
All right, thank you.
Should we thank our speaker?
Thank you.
Thank our speaker.
Wow, we are so lucky to have you.